teach class?
Go ahead, Joel. Just go ahead. I'll get a chair for you, and you'll be right up here with me.
All right, did everybody get a sheet? If you didn't, Michelle needs one. Marty, you got any more? Joel got any more?
Yeah.
Raise your hand, Joel, get them to you. If anyone else got a job, we'll get Joel to do tonight. We're in John chapter 4. Brad is planning on having the young adult class starting next week. And so we encourage you, if you're part of that group, to be involved in that each Wednesday night too. And Joel's going to be teaching it as well some. And it's going to be on how to ruin your life by 40. Some of us obviously don't qualify for that anymore. So, sounds like a good study though. John chapter 4. Well, I don't have Michael here with me, so that means you're going to have to talk some more too and offer thoughts and suggestions as we go through the text. Beginning, I want to look at this passage as if we have a pre-meeting, a meeting, and then a post-meeting, all with the woman at the well. All with the Samaritan woman. And so we're going to have a text, the first several verses before they have the meeting, and then we'll have the meeting, which lasts from 7 to 26, and then we'll have a post-meeting, what happens after the meeting with the woman at the well. And let's begin in verse number 1. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples. He left Judea and departed again for Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. And he came to the town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. This is the pre-meeting, and I have a few pictures I thought you might enjoy seeing and a map about what takes place. The Pharisees begin to get jealous because Jesus is baptizing more disciples than John, and they begin to be concerned about the people going after Jesus. And so this is going to be a common theme in the next several chapters of the book of John, is that the Pharisees are getting to be very jealous of Jesus and are going to have to contend with him. But right now, Jesus decides he's not ready for the fight. He's not ready to really face the consequences of fighting the Pharisees now, which will eventually lead to his death. So he wants to teach longer. So he is going to go on down to Galilee. And so on this map, maybe you can see this, we have Jesus, who is up here in Judea, and down here in Judea, and he's going to go up to Galilee. Now, the common way to go, obviously the straight way to go, is just to go straight from south directly up to the north. This is about a 70-mile journey, about 2.5 days of walking. But you had to go right through Samaria. Jews, because they often did not want to go through Samaria and be connected with the Samaritans, would often go, as that little red dot shows, they would often cross the Jordan River, go up through this area, which was still a part of Israel, and go up and then cross back over so they could avoid the land of Samaria. But Jesus had to go through this. And the term "had" here involves the idea of compulsion. It's like he had a divine appointment. God wanted him to go this way. It could be simply that he needed to go that way because he didn't want to walk twice as far. And Josephus says that it was common for Jews to go this way and to go ahead and go that way and not go the extra route. But anyways, Jesus chooses to go this way. Now when he goes there, he's going to sit down by Jacob's well, which looked like a building built in 1860 at that point, I'm sure. That was a joke. That building there is built in 1860, but Jacob's well is there. My understanding is it's in this part of it somewhere, and this is a Greek Orthodox monastery now. The monastery was built in the 1860s on the site of a late 4th century Byzantine church, which itself succeeded by a Crusader church. So they had numerous churches built over this well. I'm told that the well is actually basically what you would think of as a common well, very small hole in the ground, which had a small area to sit down there by the well, and it went about 100 feet deep. And it was very significant in this area. Though there are several springs in the area, it was significant so they could go and get water from it. So it's a very ancient place, and churches and things have built over this site ever since, and that's what it looks like in more recent times. I am told that there's a more modern structure built around 2007 that if you go there today, you'll see that as well. Now, right close to Jacob's well, this is just extra for you, I thought it was interesting, is Joseph's tomb. I think it's like a mile distance away, real close, is Joseph's tomb, and where Joseph is supposedly buried. So you have Jacob there digging this well and things, and then Joseph there. By the way, Jacob's well is not mentioned in the Old Testament. We don't have a record of him digging it in the Old Testament, but you have this New Testament talking about it. Now, that's a picture of Joseph's tomb. I don't know if that's the actual body of Joseph or not, but that's what they claim. Now, this is important for our study because down in chapter 4, in verses 22 and following, she's going to ask, or verse 20 and following, she's going to ask about which mountain we should worship on. Should we worship on Mount Gerizim or Mount Zion, where the Jews worship? The Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And this is a picture of this Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. And you have this valley here, and during the Israelite conquest of Canaan, they're going to gather on both sides of these valleys, and before they are going to conquer the rest of the land, they're going to renew the covenant here. And so in Deuteronomy, this is a significant place here on this Mount Gerizim, which is where the Samaritans see as holy ground. They're going to talk about a temple there. The Samaritans worshiped on Mount Gerizim, and they said that's the holy site where we're to worship. And this is the remains of their temple that they had there. And that's an aerial photo of the temple at Mount Gerizim. And so all this was what was there that Jesus and this lady are going to talk about. You see the structure of this temple and kind of how it was there on Mount Gerizim. And then that looks just like a regular rock ground, but that was considered a very holy place for the Samaritans because they believed it was the rock that was the place where Isaac was going to be sacrificed by Abraham. Now, the Jews, of course, did not believe that. The Jews believed that it was on Mount Zion, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Mount Moriah. And so, you see this debate. You see this beginning here by looking at the geography of what's going to be in our text about, is it Mount Gerizim or is it Jerusalem? The Jewish versus the Samaritan beliefs. And what's significant about this is Christ is going to try to reach this Samaritan woman and is going to reach out to her. And so I wanted to share with you some pictures so you kind of have an idea about that. Does anybody have any questions over any of those photos before we look at the rest of the passage? Anybody have any observations or thoughts about that? Well, then let's focus back on the handout and work our way through that. So we've already talked about letter C. Jesus had to pass through Samaria. So small letter A there. What appointments does God have for you? If Jesus had to go through Samaria, and as you think about this, his disciples are going to go away into the city to get food, and Jesus is going to be left there, and so that causes him, verse 8, his disciples had gone away, and so Jesus, verse 9, is going to ask a drink from this woman. Think about the providential situations that led to this conversation and led to the conversion of an entire village. Jesus just happened to come to this well. This lady happened to come to this well, which was kind of like a social gathering spot. I would compare it, in reading a little bit about it, to Beaver Dam. It's on this main road, and it seems like anytime you stop by there, you'll meet someone coming or going that you know. Maybe from Mayfield even. It's kind of like a main stopping center that's kind of a hub for this main avenue. Now, I heard people talk about that for years, and I never really went up that way. And in the last several years, I've been traveling up that way a lot more with Austin's ball games and having to go to Louisville some for class. And I've observed that and know what people talk about with that. Well, that's what Jacob's well was. There was several springs around the area. They believed that the other town, Shechem, probably had a well of its own about a mile away. And so, but this was kind of a social place. And also, it's possible that this was not the normal time to be gathering water. Most of the time, women went in groups earlier in the morning. But here she comes about noon. We know that this lady, as we'll find out, was more of a social outcast, possibly. That she had been married 5 times and now was living with a man who Jesus says was not her husband. And so she comes alone. So possibly she comes at this hour trying to avoid people. Think about the circumstances that led to this conversation. And I say all that to say, you never know what God has planned for your daily life. And don't be so busy. Don't be so focused that you don't stop and realize that God often works in the ordinary, the mundane, and in the common. And that some of your best ministry opportunities, some of your best evangelistic opportunities, some of the best opportunities you have to be kind and loving and Christ-like come in the context of daily life. And who knows how it all worked out for you two to be at that place in a common meeting, that you might be able to impact somebody's life through something you say or do because God had a reason for you to be there. And so I think we need to pause and realize that we need to be open to that. We need to be aware of that. And that leads kind of the next thought. That is that Jesus was weary from his journey. Verse 5. Verse 6, he was weary from his journey. He was tired. And some say that he probably could have walked already that morning as much as 6 hours or more. They left about 6 in the morning, left around daybreak. I said that's when that would be. They believe that this reference to time indicates that it's about noon here, the 6th hour of the day. In Jewish timetable would make that about noon. And so he'd been walking probably about 5-6 hours. He was tired. I don't know why he was more tired than the disciples. There's no explanation given there. The disciples go into town to get food. Jesus waits by the well. But he was tired, which leads me to say this, and I need to hear this from my own life, as a parent, as a husband, as a Christian. Sometimes we can allow an excuse of being tired to rationalize our poor attitude or grumpiness or rude remarks. And we got to realize that the Lord was not too tired to be kind, to be loving, and to be evangelistic. And so he was wearied from his journey. He was tired. He was thirsty. But he still had the energy to share the gospel with this Samaritan woman. And so do we allow physical tiredness to become an excuse? All right, that's the pre-meeting. Now we're going to talk about the meeting. But let me pause and say, what observations or questions would you have about the first 6 verses? Anybody got anything? All right, let's move on then and talk about the meeting. So, verse 7 through 26. I'm just going to read a lot of this. A woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" She was shocked. Number one, he was a Jewish man. Jews do not talk to Samaritans. Jews had a very bitter, hateful perspective toward Samaritans. And by the way, let me say, I'll read a little more about that in a moment, but that went both ways. It wasn't just the Samaritan Jews toward the Samaritans. The Samaritans didn't like them either. And so she was shocked that Jesus was talking to her. And she was also shocked because she says, a woman of Samaria. It was also not socially acceptable or socially the manner that was done in that day for men, especially a rabbi like Jesus, to be talking to a woman. Now that sounds very odd for our culture, but in public, like at this time, men didn't talk to women, often did not even talk to their wives that much out in public, and especially not to someone who was not their wife, who was a stranger. But Jesus is not bound by cultural rules. He kind of blows culture out of the way a lot, because even if you think about all the rules the Pharisees had and how they weren't supposed to eat grain on the Sabbath and all these kind of rules they had, Jesus didn't live by them either, did he? He wasn't going to be bound by this social taboo custom, because he created this woman, he loved this woman, and he wanted to reach her with the good news of Jesus Christ. And so he begins to talk to this woman. For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Now, let me read a little bit about that from David Life's commentary that was interesting. Because I know we hear that, but just like all racial issues, it goes back into history. And so let me read you a little history back into this. The historical background of the hatred between Jews and Samaritans goes back to 722 BC and the destruction of Samaria in 2 Kings 17. Most of the Israelites' inhabitants were removed at that time, and the Assyrians repopulated the area with people from other lands. So the Assyrians come in. The Jewish people were carried away into captivity. All right? And here's what happens. Israelites who remained in the land intermarried with foreigners who came in and had been placed there. Their descendants subsequently lost their Israelite identity. Further, the new inhabitants brought with them their own concepts of worship. Although they eventually adopted the God of Israel, their worship was never pure worship. When some of the Jews returned from Babylonian captivity, they rejected the Samaritans' offer to help in rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, and this resulted in more hatred. You might have heard people say, and I've said this before, that the Jews looked at the Samaritans as if they were half-breeds, as if they were mixed stock, if you will. And so they looked down upon them. because they were not pure Jews. And let me make sure you understood why that was the case. The reason was when the Jews were carried away into captivity, the Jews who remained behind, when the Assyrians repopulated that area, they did what always happens. They intermarried, they had children, and so you have basically a Jewish and a Gentile children born, and then that basically becomes, over the centuries, that becomes a new identity of people. And they mingled the pagan religion with their Jewish roots. So you have the history of the Jewish roots plus the Assyrian religion and things, and they basically create the Samaritan religion, which had a lot of parts of Judaism but was also not faithful to all of Judaism. And so the Jewish people looked down upon them because they said, well, y'all are basically a mixed breed. And that's what you have coming out of that. So I won't read you all the details. That will go, there's more things that's going to happen during the intertestamental period. Herod's going to be a part of those things and other things. But that's the basic idea of why there was bitterness between the Jews and the Samaritans. And then they divided over their religious views. Anybody got a comment on that or a question? Well, let's notice then how Jesus crossed these social barriers. He's going to talk to this woman, and he's going to quickly turn the conversation. First of all, notice that Jesus, and I think, there's been a lot of talk about all the racial issues in 2020, and let me just say that I think it's important to notice a couple quick observations in this racially tension text that we have here. Number one, Jesus did not focus on the outward race of the lady. His focus was upon her soul, and he saw no difference in her and any other person in a way of accountability before God, in a way of created before God, and in a way of being loved by God. And I think that that's a very significant point. And secondly, I would notice this, that Jesus' focus was not upon correcting all of the social ills of that time. His focus was not upon trying to reconcile in every way the Jews and Samaritans, or men and women, but his focus was primarily upon what? Sharing the message of the living water of Jesus Christ and the saving message of the gospel with this woman. I think those two observations should be our same perspective as we deal with racial issues today. Number one, everybody has a soul. We are to see and love every person as if they are a person created by God, in the image of God, and redeemed by Christ on Calvary's cross. We ought to see everybody with that perspective. And secondly, we ought to be more concerned, number one concern, about reaching people with the gospel, because the gospel is truly the only thing that will save someone, and it is the only thing that can truly bring about reconciliation, and it's the only thing that we as the church should be primarily focused upon, is sharing the gospel. And so I would just make those couple observations as we look at what Jesus does in this text. Notice also that Jesus then will turn this conversation into a spiritual one in verses 10 through 15. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water?" So he had asked for physical water, and she says, "You don't have anything to draw with, and I can't believe you're asking me." So Jesus says, "Well, I may not have anything to draw with, but I could give you living water. I could give you water that is going to be," he's speaking in spiritual terms, "everlasting." And then she says, verse 12, "Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. You see the switch from physical water to spiritual water. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. Now she's still thinking physically. Jesus has been talking spiritually. He's talking about, I can give you a source of life, a source of strength that will be with you for all times, a spiritual reservoir, a spiritual life within you through Christ that you can have. This is very similar to Christ talking about bread later on in John, and about how he is the bread of life and how we are to eat of the bread of life and we are to have the sustenance of Christ. And so it's the same kind of analogy. Just like we need water to drink, we as Christians should need Christ to make it through this life. And water is that spiritual, that everlasting water that he's talking about, is that spiritual source of salvation, that spiritual source of peace, that spiritual source of joy that we can have because we're a Christian that leads to eternal life. And this woman didn't fully get that, but that's what he's giving her, and that's what he's offering her. So the question then, and maybe someone will have a comment on this, how can we turn normal conversations into spiritual conversations? How can you turn a normal conversation into a spiritual conversation? Anybody have a thought? Anybody? Going once? Going twice? Now moms, some of these moms out here are good at doing this with kids, right? You're good at turning a conversation, and I would say we're probably better at with little kids than we are our teenagers and we are adults. But if we would take that same thought, we can have a kid and we'll see a rainbow, and what will we say? You know who created the rainbow? And we'll tell them, remind them the story of Noah, and of course the kids know that story. We'll talk to them about, that rainbow was given by God, and it's a promise that he'll never destroy the world again with water. God gave us that. We've taken a physical situation, we've turned it into a spiritual conversation. We do that a lot with kids. But you can do it. You can do it with adults too. And you don't have to be pushy. I think this is a good evangelistic tip, is that you don't have to be pushy to be evangelistic. Someone may be sharing with you as simple as, man, I've been feeling lonely lately. This staying at home all the time, I've just really been down, not being able to see anybody. And you could take that statement and you can quickly and easily turn that into an invitation to come to church, right? Well, I was feeling that way too a lot, but it's really helped me being able to get back with my church family. I would like to invite you to come worship with us. We're worshiping this Sunday. I invite you to come. You've taken a basic statement and you've been able to turn that to a spiritual conversation, but you've not done it in a way that's going to turn anybody off. And so you can do that with a lot of things. Jesus is the master at it, right? He does that all the time. He takes physical things, he takes a thing that all of us know and see. He takes his parables, he takes those physical things, and then he turns them into a spiritual application. You and I need to work on doing that with others more, turning that. Somebody else have a thought or idea on that? Look at the next thing then, verses 16 through 18. Try to get through the meeting. So after making this spiritual conversation, he then gets personal. He said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." Now, Jesus had the knowledge of knowing, because of his divine wisdom and divine foresight, everything about this woman. And so he asked this with an intention of knowing that what she would say. And the woman answered him, I have no husband. And Jesus said to her, you are right in saying, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. Now, he got very personal there to the woman he just met, didn't he? Why did Jesus get so personal? Why did he turn this basically kind of very non-offensive conversation about water into, yeah, you're living with someone, you've already had 5 husbands? I mean, that's a pretty big jump, right? One, I'll offer you living water, and can you draw some water from where we just met each other? 2, you've had 5 husbands, and I know all about your life, and the one you're with now is not. Why did Jesus do that? What do you think? What do you say, Jeff? Show her. He knew who she was. I think that's a big part of it, Jeff. He wanted to, and that's going to be a big part of her believing in him. He wanted to show her that he knew her life. Good point. What else? Why would he do this? Why else would he do it? Yes. Yes, he wanted to show her that he was God, that he could know and see in her life. I think that's a big reason Jesus does it. What else? I think those are both the reason when it comes to showing her that he is the Messiah. I think a second reason is that he wanted her to realize she needed a Messiah. So he wants her to believe I'm the Messiah, but he also wants her to know you need a Messiah. He wanted to convict her of her sins and let her know that he's aware of those sins and that she could look to him for salvation. And I would say that this is kind of a, evangelism in, going at microwave speed. You don't typically go this fast in one conversation. At least, what we have here. But that's how any evangelism's got to go, right? It's got to go from getting a thought about spiritual things to eventually a personal conversation that says you need the gospel and you're a sinner and you need salvation. You see, the hard thing about the gospel is it is good news, but you got to get them to understand the bad news first. And if they don't get the bad news, they don't really get why it's good news. And Jesus wanted her to know, I understand the bad news, and you need to know that you are guilty of sin, and you need the good news of the Messiah. And so I think Jesus gets personal because he wanted to convict her of sin. And once again, this is very good example of an evangelistic strategy for us. You got to get people to understand their need for the gospel. Look at what she does, though. And this is, once again, very typical. Verse 18 and following. All right, we're about out of time. So what she does is she begins to say, verse 20, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where we ought to worship. Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. What did she do? We were talking about water. We were talking about her marital state. And now we're talking about which mountain to worship on? That didn't really make a lot of sense here. she did what I would call a defense mechanism. She did what a lot of people do. Most of us do. When you get personal into someone's life, what do? Change the subject. And we like to use doctrinal smoke screens to throw out something and say, well, let's talk about this. So you talk to someone, you're trying to get them to think about Jesus, and they realize, man, I haven't been to church in years. I realize my life's not right. I realize I'm living in sin. And then they very quickly turn and ask you some doctrinal question about worship or about some detail in Revelation or something like that. The end of time, what are they doing? They're putting up a smoke screen to keep you away from their heart. And so we have to be careful and not get into doctrinal debates when the focus should be upon the heart and getting the person of Jesus. Joel?
In my version, in the New American Standard Version that I have here, it even says, where you said, and you say, the New American Standard says, and you people say. How many times have you heard that to you? You people.
Yeah.
You people down there believe this, and they tell you what you believe. It may be misunderstood what you believe, but they'll tell you, and you people say this, and trying to make it controversial.
Yes.
And like you said, and then they'll get off on something that end of time stuff or something, and you people say this when it's really not going to matter what happens at the end of time if you're not saved.
That's right.
You know, whether Jesus comes back and does this or does that, it doesn't matter. If you're not in a saved condition, it's bad news for you. And so I think you're exactly right that she turns it into, and you people, you Jews, think you've got all the answers.
Yeah.
You think you're the only ones saved.
It does apply a lot. If you couldn't hear Joel, he was talking about how she says you people, and how we often hear that people talk about it in the church. Well, you people say this. Y'all think you're the only ones going to heaven, or you people, y'all worship like this, or you, and they want to kind of throw that in and get into a dismiss it instead of keeping a focus on, salvation. And those issues like that often are meant to divert us from the change that you're calling them to make in their life. And so, good point. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to stop. I wish we could stay here another 15, 20 minutes and make it through this, but we will stop. And so if you need to go ahead and leave, before I dismiss, go ahead and leave. And then we're going to pick up next week with this section on, we'll pick up talking about the doctrinal things and notice the progression of her faith. And then we will get into the post-meeting and make it through the rest of the chapter. I didn't think we'd get all the way through that, but we were able to have some good discussion, and we'll finish up with this story next week. All right. Thank you for everybody being here, and we're dismissed.